U.S. officials are now preparing to meet next week with Zelensky in Saudi Arabia, discussing a framework for peace. And today, another new twist, despite Trump insisting for weeks now that Russia wants peace. An admission they don't seem to want it that much. President Trump announcing possible large-scale sanctions on Russia because it is, quote, absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now. And we should note Russia is also absolutely pounding innocent Ukrainians as well, bombarding civilian targets, killing close to 100 civilians since Trump held what he called a highly productive phone call with Vladimir Putin less than 3 weeks ago.
Russia, if I may, President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, and I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early.
This clip is a roller coaster of contradictions, questionable math, and enough diplomatic whiplash to make your head spin. Whether you're Team Red, Team Blue, or just here for the chaos, this one's got it all. Let's break it down. Hit that like button if you're ready for some unfiltered political takes, and let's get into it.
And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that. You can't do that.
Mr. President.
We're trying to help them. And Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done. Michael, could you come up here? I see Michael back there. Yeah, good, I'm glad. He's traveling all over the world. I just saw him come in the door. Could you give a little definition of what's going on, please?
Sure. Well, the president has been crystal clear, and he's been clear to all sides. The fighting has to stop. Both sides need to get to the table. We had a good engagement. Both leaders have said only President Trump could do so, and only he has been able to do so. We had an initial engagement with the Russians. The Ukrainians had a great opportunity to bind our economies together through that mineral deal. Unfortunately, that didn't go so well, but we think we're going to get things back on track. Secretary Rubio, myself and the Ukrainian delegation will be meeting in Saudi Arabia next week to get these talks back on track, get the ceasefire in place, and drive peace home under President Trump's leadership.
I think both.
Only President Trump could do so. Really? Only him? That's a bold claim, especially when the guy he's praising, Putin, is still actively bombing Ukraine. And let's talk about this mineral deal that supposedly didn't go well. What even was that? Was it some kind of geopolitical pyramid scheme? Because it sounds like they were trying to sell Ukraine's resources to Russia while the country is literally being invaded. That's like trying to sell someone's car while it's being stolen. And then there's this whole Saudi Arabia meeting. Look, I'm all for diplomacy, but let's be real. This feels less like a peace summit and more like a reality TV show where everyone's trying to out-negotiate each other. Trump's out here acting like he's the only one who can fix this, but let's not forget, he's the same guy who paused military aid to Ukraine while saying Russia is pounding them. So are we helping or hindering? Because right now, it's hard to tell. This whole thing is giving me major too many cooks in the kitchen vibes. You've got Trump, Putin, Zelensky, Saudi Arabia, and now Marco Rubio jumping in like he's hosting a season finale of Survivor Geopolitical Edition. Someone needs to take control of this mess before it spirals even further.
Parties want to settle. I think if I wasn't president, this war would have had no chance of settlement, zero chance. But I think we're going to get it settled and stopped. We got to stop. They're losing on average 2,000 soldiers a week. That's a lot of soldiers. Do you agree, Peter?
It's a lot of soldiers on both sides, I agree. Do you, Mr. President, think that Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of the U.S. pause right now on intelligence and military aid to Ukraine?
No, I actually think he's doing what anybody else would do. I think he wants to get it stopped and settled, and I think he's hitting them harder than he's been hitting them. And I think probably anybody in that position would be doing that right now. He wants to get it ended, and I think Ukraine wants to get it ended, but I don't see, it's crazy. They're taking tremendous punishment. I don't quite get it, but I suspect, Michael, he probably wants to get it ended.
He does, Mr. President. The Russians are taking incredible losses on the front. As the president has
They both
said,
are.
this is a meat grinder of people, of material, of national treasure, and no one else has any solutions except to let this war continue forever. But I'll add, the president has had multiple conversations and a visit from President Macron of France, Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom. We have the NATO Secretary General coming next week. We have this meeting with the Ukrainians. We've had it with the Russians. All of this in the president's first month in his leadership. We will engage in the shuttle diplomacy, and we will continue to use his leadership and what leverage we have to get both sides of the peace table.
President, in regards to the pause on military assistance to Ukraine, you put out on your social media post today that Russia is pounding Ukraine.
That's right.
Why not provide Ukraine with air defenses? And what happens, Mr. President, when Ukraine runs out of...
Well, because
missile
yeah,
weapons?
good question. Because I have to know that they want to settle. I don't know that they want to settle. If they don't want to settle, we're out of there because we want them to settle. And I'm doing it to stop death, more important than anything else. Secondarily, way down the line is the money. So we're in for $350 billion, and Europe is in for $100 billion. They should be in for the same or more than us. And, you know, I watched over the last week or so what's going on in Europe. This thing could end up in World War III if we don't get it settled. This could really end up in a World War III. We got to get it settled.
To be clear, that math ain't mathin'. The U.S. actually appropriated about $183 billion for the Ukraine war, according to the government inspector general.
What we heard, though, in that statement was the suggestion that indeed he finds Ukraine harder to deal with than Russia, and that Russia wants to make a deal. He also said again that they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, that's the Russians, but also saying that Vladimir Putin is doing what anybody else would do. I'm not entirely sure if that's a reference to his negotiating strategy or if indeed it's something to do with the bombardment that we've been seeing, but clearly an emphasis on the talks on Tuesday in Saudi Arabia, which will be key, of course. We understand that National Security Advisor Waltz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be going there for that. But there is, I think, an element of anxiety potentially as to what the ask will be. You heard National Security Advisor Waltz there talking about how they want to get the relationship back on track. Now, clearly there is an optimism potentially that the rare earth minerals deal can be signed. But I think there's also some concern in that the peace plan that appears to be taking some kind of shape, there's multiple variations. There's the US-Russia discussions occurring, there's the European peace plan that's seeming to take some kind of shape, and there is potentially something else which we may not be entirely privy to. The details of that may eventually percolate through in this Riyadh meeting. So a lot, I think, that leaves Ukrainians deeply anxious here. And I think also, too, within a matter of an hour, we heard a Truth Social post from the president saying that he was strongly considering trenchant sanctions against Russia to push him to the peace table. But then in the same hour almost, this Oval Office appearance in which he talked about how Russia was easier to deal with than Ukraine. So the whiplash here, frankly, the discombobulation, the lack of clarity about where the United States stands leaves many concerned. But if you look at the practical moves of the United States, they've limited aid and intelligence sharing to their former ally, Ukraine. I say former because many here are entirely unclear where the United States sits in all of this. They appear to feel an affinity towards Vladimir Putin, at least that was expressed.
What did we learn today? Well, for starters, the U.S. foreign policy playbook seems to be written in invisible ink, because no one, not even the people in charge, seems to know what's going on. Between Trump's "I believe Putin" moment and the constant back and forth on sanctions and aid, it's clear that clarity is not exactly the name of the game here. But hey, at least we've got Saudi Arabia to look forward to next week. Maybe they'll sort this mess out. Or maybe it'll just be another episode of Diplomatic Blunders, the series. Either way, I'll be here to break it all down for you. And hey, drop a comment below. Do you think this whole thing is headed for World War III, or is it just another day in the geopolitical circus? See you next time.